Hello, and welcome to our last episode about WoW's endgame, focused on the history of raids as a feature. Raids have been since the start, back in 2004, the hardest content of the game, and they were a massive organization-wise affair. All the first raids, Molten Core, Blackwing Lair, Ankh-Raj, Onyx's Lair, and Naxxramas, needed 40 players, and a long series of attunements and gear grinds to be entered and successfully cleared. It wasn't easy, although the most difficult parts were, hands down, getting around 40 people and keep them geared, considering bosses dropped at best 2 free pieces of loot. Things got simplified apparently in the Burning Crusade, with raid sizes going down to 25 players instead, and later on, the first 10-man raid of the game, Karazhan. Karazhan was the first attempt to make raiding more accessible, also added a badge system complementary with the one from Heroic Dungeons, to ease the clearing process, although the long attunement questlines were still present. Wrath of the Lich King introduced 10-man raids as a stable thing, but it also introduced hard modes, a way to make fights more difficult but also more rewarding. It's though with Icecrown Citadel that Blizzard found a way that would last for more than one expansion, 10 and 25-man, normal and heroic difficulties. All of Cataclysm raids had the same difficulty system ongoing with no real changes until the last raid of the expansion, Dragon's Soul. 4-3 followed the same pattern, but also saw the addition of an ulterior difficulty, Looking for Raid, LFR, a keyable raid difficulty. The introduction of LFR sparked a lot of controversy, not yet over, about the opportunity to let people and casual players see the highest difficulty content of the game, despite it being tied to the story progression, without actually organizing a group. The addition of LFR also made it so that Blizzard saw fit to inflate the number of people interested in queuing for it by developing legendary questlines, doable only in raids, and LFR2 for most of their steps, as for the Cloak in Mist of Pandaria and the Ring in Warlords of Draenor. Otherwise, raids retained their difficulty sizes up until 5.4 patch, Siege of Orgrimmar. Siege of Orgrimmar was presented in one more difficulty, Flex. Flex was the first attempt from Blizzard to add an actually flexible, in terms of number of participants, raid difficulty. Much and such like LFR, the raid was broken into wings, and those wings were accessible only via queuing for them, yet you could queue only as a group or join a group already formed. The experiment was a success, giving more life to a year-long patch and, at its ending, the birth to the next, and for now last, change of how raid difficulties work in the game. In Warlords pre-patch, in fact, Siege of Orgrimmar was redesigned to adjust to the system still in place today, 3 expansions later. 3 flexible difficulties, able to host any number of players from 10 to 30. LFR, normal and heroic, and the hardest difficulty mythic with a fixed number of players set as 20. While the change of paradigm didn't come without some drama, it's become the stablest model for the game's raiding. Warlords itself brought no real changes, aside an attempt to make the second and last year of the expansion have an inside division of item levels. Basically the first half and the second half had a gap of 10 levels. In Legion, the legendary questlines were swapped with chances for legendary items to drop from anything of note, including LFR, while in Battle for Azeroth there is nothing but a few questlines feeding players to LFR, and otherwise players do raids for their own progression, although most recently the addition of a new currency seems to have given new life to the lower levels of raiding. The paradigm doesn't also seem to be going to change in Shadowlands, and certainly no announcements have been made in that sense. While dungeons, aside the addition of Mythic Plus in Legion, and that was a massive change, have seen their structure remain basically the same throughout the history of the game, raids have seen a lot of changes in very little time before stabilizing in the form we know today. In general, there's been also a growth in complexity in the mechanics of the encounters as well. Most fights in Battle for Azeroth have per se more mechanics than all encounters in a single classic raid put together, and they grow obviously more complex depending on the difficulty. The other side of the coin is, of course, that to allow for such tactical complexity, classes have been rendered less and less specific or complex, at least as far as basics go, and that seems to be going to change in Shadowlands, with more focus on class identity and not spec identity, and a recovery of class utility overall, but it's too early to say. And this is all for today's video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you